Good afternoon and welcome. And I'm very thankful that we have a room full of very engaged and interested faces, because I know we have quite a bit of competition this afternoon. There's some very interesting sessions, but I hope that our session today, you will come away feeling that you understand exactly why we've chosen this topic and why we are so passionate about sharing this with you at this forum where everybody is looking across quite a wide spectrum of issues related to corruption. So my name is Andrea Hampton. I am the manager of the WCO's Anti-Corruption and Integrity Promotion Program. The WCO is the World Customs Organization. I'm delighted to be joined today by a group of distinguished people, representatives of our members, the customs administrations. We have the US, Canada, Jamaica, and Malawi at the table today. My co-facilitator, Azar from Canada Border Services Agency, will be facilitating the discussion of the panel. But first, I wanted to just share a global perspective, what the customs community as a whole is doing to tackle issues of corruption. But before that, I would like to, I have the pleasure of inviting our two sponsoring partners, Norway and Canada, who are here with us today, and who've really been the instigator of this activity within the WCO, particularly through their support of the WCO A-CIP program that I'll talk about in a bit. So I know that she has to run, but I would like to invite Ms. Lisa Stendrud to speak from the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, and she's the Policy Director for Anti-Corruption. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. We have all crossed some borders, I think, yeah? And not always thought about what we are seeing when we cross the borders. And for us, coming from Norway, my colleague Harald sits there, he's in the team with me working on anti-corruption. We are not used to very much of customs around our borders. We have neighbors, most of them. We have one in the north, which is not so. We don't cross that very often, particularly not now. But we do cross the other borders frequently, and with so easy crossing that we don't feel we are in another country. And I wish it was like that for all of us. So, good afternoon. I just wanted to start up a bit. It's a pleasure for me to be here at the workshop. We look at this program with great interest. We know you have an important role, all of those working in the customs. I would just like to go back a bit in history, a bit far back, actually. It goes. The history of customs goes back all the way back to Greece, the old Rome, where customs were one of the regular income sources for the state. In 1341, the Norwegian king at that time was so fed up with corruption surrounding the customs, the toll, that he issued a decree strictly prohibiting the customs to take any money or gifts for themselves. The kings in that period wanted the money for throwing lavish parties and starting wars, and so they did. So it wasn't. It was a hard work for people who had to pay the customs, and it wasn't really used for the best of the society. It actually took 200 years before the customs was established, but it was established 1548 or something, and as an institution already in 1632. So we have some long history, a very long history of customs, and many other countries do have the same. It was customs in a different way, but it was in Norway extremely corrupt institution, used for self-enrichment, and continued to be so for many, many years. For some years ago, I was sitting on a plane and we were reading Financial Times. There was a note there about you could buy yourself a position in customs in Afghanistan. It was quite expensive, but it was very lucrative. We did exactly the same in Norway. You could sort of bid for that and get that position. So the roots of corruption were really deeply entrenched in social norms and expectations to both social and political life. So I just want to say we have a history, it's a long time, we have moved on. We know it takes time. I was asked to talk about why NORAD had chosen to support customs institution in the fight against corruption and through the World Customs Organization. And I would say I think I said it was 5 reasons, but actually there are 6, I find here when I count. We see custom administration as key actors in control schemes and in collected data needed to monitor and control trade and to detect and prevent any illegal trade in and outwards of the country. This data is valuable for decision makers to make good decisions. We regard also the customs as an important institution to collect revenues. Thus, they play a central role in domestic resource mobilization. A well-functioning customs service has very positive effect on business environment and private sector. A ship would rather sail to a port where the customs are efficient and predictable than docking in port with bad service and corruption. An efficient customs service saves valuable time for the private sector. The 4th reason is the customs' role in fighting corruption is extremely important, as the corruption is often an enabler for serious crime, like wildlife crime, environmental crime, which can affect the national economy, the nature, and the security in a serious way. Customs' role as one of the protectors of safe society is often forgotten, but this has not been well recognized. And I'm going to mention one example from Norway, recent time. Some of you may remember the terror attack in Norway in July 2011, where 77 persons were killed, 69 of them very young. I'm getting emotional. The terrorists behind these acts had, on several occasions, imported goods which did indicate that he was gaining capacity to carry out a criminal act. The customs had been clearly aware of its role. It had reported the import of suspicious goods to the police, and his name, together with 40 other names, were submitted to the police 7 months before the attack. But the police did not act on the information. We had a barrier, but it wasn't paid attention to. The cooperation between the institutions, domestic institutions, with the tax authorities or law enforcement or others, is important, and it is important for all of our security. I come to the 6 points. Customs have a role to play to protect the environment. Turning a blind eye to the environmental crime affects us all. It is not only big business, but it's also run by international criminal networks. Customs also has a role to avoid damage to health. Harmful and waste products poison the earth, and toxic waste causes long-term poisoning of water and soil. And those are illegally shipped to and dumped in other jurisdictions, crossing several borders. Norway also supports the UNODC container control program, and we see opportunities for good cooperation and exchange of information and experience between the World Customs Organization and UNODC in this field and in other fields where UNODC also has competence and capacity. We support UNODC in their anti-corruption work, and we would very much like to see this coming together and being sort of complementary to the work that the World Customs Organization is doing. So let me end my contribution by saying that legal and technical reforms are necessary, but not enough to disrupt corrupt behavior. It must be supplemented with ownership or reform among officials, strong tone from the top, supporting activities which strengthen the integrity combined with less opportunities for corruption by designing mechanisms that create incentives, limit discretion, and include enhanced control. For that purpose, World Customs Organization's position is unique in its combined engagement in country assistance and international processes. It is vital. We are proud to support your work. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and we're very proud to be working with NORAD, and the support from you is invaluable. Without further ado, I would like to invite our second key player in this and who's enabled this is Global Affairs Canada, working for the Government of Canada. Ms. Christine Constantin is the Director of the Counterterrorism and Anti-Crime Capacity Building Program at Global Affairs Canada.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I joked earlier that my introduction was timed at 45 minutes, but I promise I will only take 1 minute of your time. So good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here in Washington today, and thank you for attending this important panel on the responses and work of customs organizations against corruption. Just last week in The Hague, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Mélanie Joly, with her counterparts from the Netherlands and Ecuador, attended a high-level roundtable discussion during which the ministers committed to work together on fighting corruption, to strengthen democracies, and to promote human rights. I am joined here today by Alan Azar, who is representing Canada Border Services Agency, a part of the Canadian government that has generously shared its time and expertise with this initiative. In March 2021, Canada's Anti-Crime and Counterterrorism Capacity Building Program initiated its support to the WCO flagship Anti-Corruption and Integrity Promotion Program for Customs through a 3-year project funded at a total of 3.5 million Canadian dollars. This funding reinforced Canada's continued support to customs administrations in Latin America and the Caribbean. We also support our longtime partner, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, in partnership with the WCO in the implementation of the Container Control Program in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our support to the WCO allowed the A-CIP program's activities to be expanded and sustained in the Americas. Canada is proud to support the WCO to deliver technical assistance and capacity building support in Antigua, Barbuda, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Guyana, Jamaica, Honduras, and Mexico to strengthen effective national customs integrity programs. Canada strongly supports work to combat corruption and illicit trade and values the work being done by the WCO to contribute to the overarching objective of preventing and responding to threats posed by transnational organized crime. And I am proud to say that our work with the WCO also ensures that gender equality considerations are being integrated and applied to the initiative, and this is in line with Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy and its National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. Canada and the United States share the world's longest international shared border. Our collaboration efforts are ambitious, and they are an example to the world. The role of customs is key to a nation's economic development and protection of its citizens. Customs institutions are at the front lines of enabling legitimate trade and preventing and fighting criminal activities such as illicit trafficking of drugs, firearms, and people. We recognize that by preventing corrupt behavior within foreign administrations, customs institutions will have the trust and resources to tackle cross-border crime. In addition, Canada recognizes that corruption undermines public trust and effective governance, both of which are key tenets of democratic governance and institutions, including customs. Institutions that have committed to combating corruption and established frameworks, such as through WCO's revised Arusha Declaration, have the capacity to reduce or eliminate opportunities for corruption amongst its members. I commend and thank the A-CIP program partners and the WCO for the steadfast commitment and work to further anti-corruption and integrity in customs, and Canada will continue to support these efforts on the international stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So as I promised, I would give a bit of a quick overview of what we're doing on this global level as the customs community. Before I do so, I just want to quickly bring some context to this. This workshop falls under the overall conference's thematic stream of ending cross-border crime, dark markets, etc. And one of the questions in that theme was, what are institutions doing about it? Well, that's what we're telling you today. And in particular, we wanted to highlight the political declaration that was made last year by the General Assembly that said, it took stock, of course, of where things were, not quite where we wanted it to be, but it certainly made this important point that in order to effectively address the issues, we needed to, first of all, take into account those who are subject specifically to high risks, as well as develop approaches that are institution-specific. And I think, as we heard these examples from a few millennia ago, customs has always been a high-risk, target for corruption, unfortunately. The World Customs Organization is an intergovernmental organization made up of 184 countries' customs administrations, if you're not familiar with it. It has 3 core functions. One is standard setting across customs administrative processes. Another is to foster cooperation between its members. And the third is to help build capacity amongst its members to implement the standards and such. And all 3 of these core functions of the WCO have been directed towards this issue, which, as we all know, has not been a new issue. We have the Integrity Subcommittee that fosters cooperation, sharing of experiences. We have our primary policy document, which is the WCO Revised Arusha Declaration, which lays out a holistic approach to the issue. And then lastly, we have the Technical Assistance and Capacity Building Program. And this is really where we've really made great strides in the last couple of years with the introduction of the WCO A-CIP program. My forward button isn't working. There's a video, there's a movie, so I think maybe the actors are warming up. Here we go.
Customs plays a vital role in protecting the political and economic fabric of society. If corrupted, revenues are lost, trade is distorted, and the legitimacy of institutions is threatened. That's why the World Customs Organization actively supports its members in their fight against corruption, with information sharing and expertise, training and tools, among other things. In the WCO's revised Arusha Declaration concerning good governance and integrity in customs, 10 key factors are defined, offering a practical and institution-specific approach to anti-corruption policies. These 10 key factors provide the framework for the WCO's flagship Anti-Corruption and Integrity Promotion Programme. Initiated in 2019 and funded by Norway and Canada, the WCO A-CIP programme delivers technical assistance and capacity building to select WCO members who are committed to improving integrity within their ranks. The A-CIP programme assists these members to develop their own tailor-made integrity projects. A dedicated program team facilitates access to expertise and knowledge sharing from other WCO members. Building on this direct support, the WCO A-CIP program acts as a catalyst for regional and international customs integrity initiatives and develops new resources for all WCO members to use. Thanks to the WCO A-CIP program, a fully digital version of the revised Arusha Declaration can now be consulted by the click of a button. Relevant information and tools are now accessible in an Implementation Resources Center. An Integrity e-learning module created under the program has been highly rated by the thousands of customs officials from around the globe who have already completed it. The A-CIP program also hosts a Customs Integrity web series, providing expert insights on a wide variety of anti-corruption topics. New capacity building material has been developed, with thousands of officers trained thus far. For example, a new internal control training curriculum was put together in close collaboration with internal affairs experts from WCO members. The A-CIP program uses performance measurement and data analysis to gauge the effectiveness of anti-corruption measures. The groundbreaking Customs Integrity Perceptions Survey, designed under the program, quantifies how customs officials and private sector stakeholders perceive the level of integrity within customs administrations. With tens of thousands of respondents so far, its useful insights empower customs administration leaders to take informed decisions. By including perceptions from the private sector, another important principle of the A-CIP program is applied: collective action. The WCO encourages customs to join their efforts with those of other national and private anti-corruption bodies. As part of its support to a collective response to corruption, the program helps customs administrations recognize and tap into synergies with international organizations, the political or trade environment, academic think tanks, or other WCO initiatives. The A-CIP program integrates cross-cutting themes such as gender, diversity, and human rights into its methods and tools, and contributes to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and Convention Against Corruption. In just a few years' time, the WCO A-CIP program has achieved tangible results in improving customs' capacity to manage, monitor, and build integrity within its partner members, and it is committed to expand its efforts in the years to come. Find out more on how the WCO A-CIP program helps customs administrations around the world to build a culture of integrity in cross-border trade.
So that was the sunny version, but we all know that it's not that easy. And one of the main principles of our approach to this program was to be very honest and practical in how we designed our approach with our members. We're a member-driven organization, and in that sense it gives us an advantage because we can have those frank discussions and understand very clearly what the problems are from a day-to-day experience of a customs administration. So some of the key challenges and things that we see across, I don't think it's exclusive to this environment, but it's something that we took into account in the design of the program, is recognizing that a lot of this can be lip service, and we know that there's sometimes a gap between what is said and what is done. So we wanted to make sure that we took that into account very carefully in the program. All of the members who are partner organizations of the program have come forward, and we have these letters of commitment with the WCO that lay out the expectations of the partner administrations, the WCO, and it really makes it very clear that this is a commitment that needs to be made on both sides, and the administrations themselves are coming forward with that commitment and in very practical terms. We also, as the video mentioned, we use collective action and those principles of transparency, because obviously the more people who know what you're doing can hold you to account and make sure that it's moving in the right direction and delivering those results. Of course, there's always the issue is too big. Corruption and integrity and in customs, there's many different actors in the supply chains, many different actors working at the border and involved in any act of corruption that involves customs inevitably involves many countless other actors as well. And the question is also the need to take a holistic approach. Where do you start? So we do have, as I mentioned, this policy framework with the 10 key factors of the revised Arusha Declaration. It's a holistic framework, but by dividing it already, we start to sort of have operation groups that we can start to assess with the partner administrations where we're most likely to have the biggest impact. And we look for opportunities of action with each partner administration to ensure that we're working in an area where the scope is clear for everybody and the results are clear for everybody within that scope, and that it's doable. The other problem that's quite common, of course, is measuring corruption. How do we measure corruption? How do we measure our activities around corruption and the impact of those activities? And we've worked very hard to take on board the need that the response to this is measuring around corruption, pulling data in from a number of different sources and using these different perspectives to give us sort of the picture within the void of what's going on. And one of the big components of this that was developed under the program is the Customs Integrity Perception Survey. And this is a survey that is specifically tailored for the customs administrative and operational environment and corruption that happens within that environment. It's delivered to both customs officials and private sector. The questions are grouped under the 10 key factors of the revised Arusha Declaration, and that helps us when we're looking to hone in on certain insights that relate to the actions and activities that we work on within certain areas, as I mentioned. So we can use these results of the survey in a much more pragmatic way than other integrity perception surveys that are not so institution specific. So the idea of the Customs Integrity Perception Survey is that the data collected on every answer from that survey is data that is going to be within the gift of a head of customs administration to actually take action, take a decision on, and to support them in their work. So that's why we felt it was very important to have a survey that had this specificity so that we could actually take action on the results. It's country level. It's not a data set. It's not an index, a comparative index. But we are looking at the global data, aggregate, anonymized, to see what sort of trends and information that we can recognize comes out of this. Of course, one of the quickest things is that we see some of the divergences between private sector perceptions and public sector, the customs officials' perceptions. Obviously, we see very commonly across the data set that customs officials think their regulatory framework is quite easy to understand, and obviously private sector we see a difference of opinion. Similarly, customs officials seem to feel their relationship with the private sector is going a bit better than the private sector themselves. So those are just some very high-level things that we see across the data. We also have been sort of looking at gaps in terms of what's available in the space for customs administrations and what they need in order to combat corruption. One of the challenges we know is that corruption is very often investigated and addressed by the internal control units within the organization. Many customs administrations take many different forms. Our combined revenue authorities, our border security agencies have many different shapes to them, and the internal affairs unit sits at the enterprise level and are staffed by people maybe coming from law enforcement that have no on-the-ground concrete experience of customs administration and operations. So, and on the other side, we see in the customs officers in their day-to-day jobs, if you ask them who's responsible for integrity within their organization, they'll point to the internal affairs teams and not to themselves. So we're trying to bridge that gap in the work and to bring internal affairs units more in touch with what's going on in the operational space of the customs work of any administration, and vice versa, help ensure that customs are engaging with the internal affairs and other parts of the organizations that are focused on integrity and take that responsibility. And combined with that is working on morale and organizational culture. We have a few sort of concrete steps that we're taking forward. One is the Canadian model of a next generation network, where we harness the younger staff and give them a platform at the table where an institutional level decisions are being made. Another is the connecting with the technical working groups that is a big part of the WCO's work, and showing where these very technical customs operational areas, where the corruption risks are, and making people understand that in their day-to-day jobs, this is the reality, this is what they are contributing or can contribute, and how it affects their daily work as well. And so We have just a few examples from some of our partner administrations, but I will skip through because we're going to be hearing from our colleagues here more. I think it's going to be much more richer for you to hear it from, I won't say the horse's mouth because I don't want to call anyone here a horse, but I think it's about time for us to hear from those who've really been on the front line of this. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Alan Azar. Alan has been working with the WCO A-CIP program. Our delivery model, as it was mentioned briefly in the video, is that we second customs experts from our customs administration members to support other customs administrations. So it's member-to-member, customs-to-customs support, and that really adds a lot of value to the picture and in terms of what kind of experiences can be shared. So, and Alan is one of these experts that we use on a regular basis. So, Alan, over to you, sir.
So good afternoon, everyone. I already mentioned for me, but my name is Alan Azar. I'm a senior analyst with the Canada Border Services Agency. And as Andrea just mentioned, I've been helping out over the past 2021, we're not in 2023 yet, so for the past year and a half, a little bit more, with the WCO A-CIP program. I have the privilege and the honor today to be able to facilitate the second part of our panel, of our workshop today. So what that will involve, what that will include, you'll be hearing the different perspectives from Canada Border Services Agency. I'm at the podium, so I'm going to go first. So I'm going to take that luxury. But we're also going to have United States Customs Border Protection, Malawi Revenue Agency, and Jamaica Customs as well. So we'll each be providing the perspective of our organizations in regard to institution-specific approaches to integrity that we have in our organizations. The second part, the final part, will be a Q&A where you can interact with us, any questions you have, either for a specific organization or for the group at large. We will be able to take any questions you have. For anyone in the room, and I won't forget to mention if there's anyone, whoever's participating in online as well, we can field those questions as well. So today, this afternoon, I will be highlighting some of the best practices that we utilize within the CBSA in regard to ensuring that staff continue to act and demonstrate integrity, both on duty and off duty as well. So, at the CBSA, integrity is the foundation of the relationship between the agency, partners, travelers, clients. This is integrity. It's one of the core values that we have for our agency. It's identified in our code of conduct. We have integrity, professionalism, and respect. This rounds out the core values that we provide to all of our employees and that they're abided to by our code of conduct. I will go over a few of the controls that we have in our organization in regard to preventing corruption. But I'm going to try to formulate this around the topic or the umbrella of a concept called aftercare. Aftercare is a term used in Canada, but I know it's used in a few other organizations as well in other countries. So what is aftercare? Aftercare practices are aimed at providing confidence in an individual's continued reliability, loyalty, and integrity. So specifically what I'm making reference to is an employee's security screening clearance. So employees who work in a law enforcement organization such as the Canada Border Services Agency or other customs organizations, there's some type of rigor process that goes into the beginning to ensure that employees will have integrity and will continue to act with integrity. Having a security screening clearance is that foundational piece right at the beginning. As a law enforcement organization entrusted with protecting Canada's borders, the CBSA, we hold our employees accountable to a very high ethical standard. So all agency employees within the CBSA, they all possess a security screening. In Canada, this is a little bit different than some other organizations. There are actually two components to the screening. You have a reliability status, and then you also have what many people have heard before, a secret or a top secret clearance. So these both make up the security clearance that we have in Canada, in the Canada Border Services Agency specifically. All employees require that reliability, and it is the basis for the minimum. To have the reliability means you have now the minimum level of access to information and to the facilities and to perform your discretionary powers as a border officer. The chief security officer that we have in the CBSA, that is the individual that has the discretion to grant or deny a reliability status. And same thing, once one has been granted, the authority to actually suspend or revoke a reliability status. And if you do not have that, it's a condition of employment, and you can no longer work with the organization, and you can no longer work for any other department within the government of Canada. So why is this important? Why does Canada take this seriously at that forefront, at the initial level with the security screening? Because of the organizations that we work in, customs organizations, border organizations, the information, the assets that we have, you can imagine being the gatekeepers to a country perhaps at the very front door. That mixed with the discretionary powers. You can see how, again, the informational assets that we have that we need to safeguard, why some of those may be attractive to individuals that are involved in criminal activities, criminal organizations, or people demonstrating corrupt behavior. So the professional integrity of CBSA employees is essential to safeguarding the assets, acts of misconduct, corruption, wrongdoing. These definitely tarnish the reputation of the agency, hinder our ability to deliver on our mandate, and definitely make it more difficult to prevent criminal activity moving forward. So I mentioned maybe about 1 minute or 2 minutes ago the concept of aftercare. Bringing it all back, a security clearance that is provided is granted at a point of time. Now, not to go into the differences, sometimes it might be shorter, but really the renewal period is at the 10-year mark. So I was thinking about this last night. 10 years is a very, very long time, so I'll stop for a second. Think amongst yourselves. Everything in the past 10 years, how many of you have gone through perhaps changes in your life, whether financial or new people coming into our family, new relationships, maybe different side jobs, thinking things that might be a conflict of interest, all positive on the good things, but changes in our lives. Anyone go through any other changes? I see hands. No one from the panelists, though. This is where it gets somewhat boring because the more I thought about it last night, I realized that my life has not really drastically changed in the past 10 years, and I'm actually being truthful. That could be a good thing. Boring can be good. Boring can be good sometimes. But again, that reliability marks a point in time, 10 years, a lot of things can happen. So the concept of aftercare back is after we grant the reliability status, the clearance, what do we do after the fact to ensure that employees maintain their integrity? There are a few components under the umbrella of security that I'll go through. The first and foremost, right at the beginning, I know it sounds a little bit more boring, but security briefing. It's a documentation. Basically, you think of a contract. So the clearance has been granted. Now it's an opportunity for our employees to sit down with their supervisor, their manager, and we're going to read through what their security responsibilities are. A little bit of a summary of things that I've already mentioned about criminal infiltration and why security matters and how they need to protect information and safeguard information. So this security briefing, once signed and understood by the employee, becomes part of their personnel security screening file. The other element that I'm a big supporter of is security awareness, security training. We was at a panel discussion earlier today, and I heard the panelists completely stole my notes for the next minute. No, I'm only kidding. He didn't steal my notes, but he was echoing the same thought of how important having training and awareness and communication on an employee's responsibility in regard to integrity. Now, in the CBSA, we do have, I'll call it security-related training. Security awareness training that's mandatory for all employees to take, insider threat security concerns training. This mixed with other training that's offered in our organization on the values and ethics side, on disclosure of wrongdoing, harassment, violence in the workplace, things like this. These are all elements that all contribute to, again, having a healthy workplace and to ensure that people are informed of what their responsibilities are. Another concept would be on the upgrades and updates. So for an employee who is going to a new level, a new position, this is when you repeat the process of the security clearance to ensure that they're at the right level. And then the final point that we have a process for is in regard for employees to report changes in their situation. The ones that we mentioned earlier, a lot of things can happen in 10 years, but unusual contacts or suspicious behavior that they need to report. Having that as an obligation for them to be able to go to their supervisor, their manager, they can be referred back to security. Like I said, changes in personal situation. Those are all things that will get reported to security and be part of their personnel security file. So these practices are essential to help build a culture of security where individuals understand and implement security policies and practices to safeguard the information, the assets that we talked about earlier. So can never stress enough the importance of that aftercare component, because again, a lot can happen in that 10-year element. Another concept, so our agency, lots of data comes through a customs organization, through a border organization, but on the concept of data monitoring in regard to aftercare, this is something new that we are looking at in the organization. So our directorate is currently in the process of developing a proactive monitoring unit that will be responsible for matching, integrating, and analyzing personal and program data to identify and detect occurrences of perhaps internal or workplace fraud, misconduct, wrongdoing, even privacy breaches. So in order to do this, we'll be utilizing data from customs data, administrative data, and personal data. So this is something that we're not doing yet, but we will be looking at within the realm of security under the concept of aftercare, where being able to use, because we all hear that the answer is in the data. This is something that we, within our little avenue, will be looking at utilizing moving forward. An example, and something that we already have, but not in the collective approach, would be someone querying their own name in a system that they have access to, but have been entrusted to Canadians to use it only for a particular process, not for doing a background check on themselves or for friends or for someone on the outside of the organization. So basically, we'll be looking at data that we already have in our systems for the purpose of identifying red flags. And that will be the key question is, what is the red flag? Like I just mentioned on the example of someone with the same name being queried would be a very quick red flag. The unit will also be conducting open source checks to identify indicators, including the support of extremist views, actions, or incidents, or criminal associations. Basically, any type of behavior that could be linked back to corrupt behavior. Now, these are just a few of the controls that we have under, again, coming from the security world, under the avenue of kind of like the corporate security angle. There are other controls that we have in place in the organization for preventing corruption. I mentioned it earlier at a high level, CBSA code of conduct that we have. Employee monitoring and oversight audit functions that we have, the reactive measures. The reactive measures are so important. Having the administrative investigation process, having the framework for how to respond to corruption is key. The aftercare is trying to trying to stop it from happening in the first place. But I want to also provide just a quick overview on risk assessments, because our agency utilizes a number of risk assessments, too, specifically on the topic of security and internal fraud, prevention of corruption at the border. Quick overview. Concept of risk management uses contextual information and assumptions about the future and supports a proactive course of action. The benefit of conducting these risk assessments allows for the identification of the mitigation controls. And those controls, I guess I mentioned, the security ones that I mentioned earlier under aftercare, but really it's identification of what the controls are, which ones work well, which ones need to be perhaps reworked. Are there any redundant controls? Are there any that are no longer applicable? Things that change so quickly where then all of a sudden you have a control, but it may not actually be doing the right thing for what it was originally intended. So having proper risk assessments for the purpose of being able to link to security issues and corrupt behavior, it allows the agency to be in a position to be able to ensure that the risk level is much, much lower. And to do this, I don't work in the risk assessment area, but I've been working with them over the past couple of years on files they've been leading. And it's just so important to see the consultative process, making sure that the appropriate stakeholders are involved and engaged during the process of risk scoring to ensure that the levels that are associated to the various risks are appropriate. And obviously on a cyclical basis, not to be done once and then kind of put to the wayside, but to ensure that it's done on a regular. I'm no expert in risk management, but some of them are at the 2 to the 5 year mark. So again, the risk assessment approach is really for the main benefit of the identification of what is needed to prevent corruption at the border, among other things. I mentioned at the very, very beginning, but integrity inside the CBSA is central to everything that the agency does to optimize trust, create a healthy workplace, and ensure productivity. This is where my speaking notes come to an end. However, you will be hearing from me again, though. But for our next panelist, I would like to welcome up to the podium Mr. Francis Tepeka, who's the Chief Investigations Manager within the Malawi Revenue Agency. Francis, over to you.
Good afternoon. Yes, my name is Francis Tepeka from Malawi Revenue Authority. I'm Chief Investigations Manager for Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs in the Malawi Revenue Authority is responsible for championing integrity issues within the Malawi Revenue Authority. Today, I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to join my fellow panelists in this discussion, customs as a leading example of specific, institution-specific response to corruption. Allow me to thank Norway and Canada for making my presence here possible today. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to share the experiences that we have in Malawi Revenue Authority. But allow me also to bring into context the overall theme of this year's International Anti-Corruption Conference, which is uprooting corruption, defending democratic values. I come from a country which has admitted that we have a challenge of corruption amongst ourselves. And also, we have agreed that we need to deal with it. I come from a country where democratic legitimacy of the government is measured by how articulate and how it implements anti-corruption agenda. I come from a country where customs has realized its unique role towards economic development and would like to take a leading role in the fight against corruption. I come from a country where fighting against corruption is no longer an option, but a necessity. I come from Malawi. Because of the unique services that customs provides, which is facilitation of legitimate trade, border protection, and collection of revenue, it is vulnerable to corruption. And as such, there is need to have effective ways of dealing with corruption within customs. The main
Clicker wasn't working.
It's not.
No.
Let's go to slide number 3. Or 4? I think 4. We have already been introduced to the revised Arusha Declaration. The revised Arusha Declaration is the focal and central feature of global effective approach to preventing corruption and increase integrity in customs. The revised Arusha Declaration provides a structured and practical approach in the fight against corruption and promotion of integrity by addressing the 10 key factors in the revised Arusha Declaration. Customs, in collaboration with the private sector, because we are not doing away with the private sector, it stands a chance of eradicating corruption. I'm talking about a chance, because there are so many factors that go into it. However, the application of the revised Arusha Declaration recognizes that there is no one-fits-all solution in the fight against corruption. Adoption of the text of standards and rules, as well as imposition of sanctions, are necessary, but not adequate. Corruption is a human behavior that may be shaped by context within which customs officers operate. This is the very approach of the A-CIP program because it advocates tailor-made solutions to corruption in the customs administrations. The A-CIP program initially was being funded by Norway, but eventually Canada joined. At that time, that was around 2019. MRA, Malawi Revenue Authority, had not joined the A-CIP program, but eventually in 2020, that's when we get incorporated as partners in the A-CIP program. As I've already said, the fight against corruption needs a specific approach by a specific institution. There is no solution that fits all the agencies that are within the A-CIP program. So this approach would require, first of all, to make a self-analysis of what exact risks of corruption are within a specific customs administration. We found quite a number of issues that we are supposed to deal with. But however, I'll give just a few examples of how we are dealing with corruption using the revised Arusha Declaration. The first one, Malawi Revenue Authority managed to lobby government and enact two separate pieces of legislation. The first one being the Tax Administration Act. This one, what it did was to harmonize and simplify regulations and procedures in the administration of taxes. That includes customs duty. This is a requirement under a regulatory framework, under the key factors of Arusha Declaration, where you're supposed to harmonize procedures as well as making them simple. The second legislation that has been enacted is the Revenue Appeals Tribunal Act. This is in line with key factor number 3, that requires that the customs administration are supposed to promote transparency. Initially, all appeals were supposed to be handled by the Commissioner General, and that was the final say on appeals. But the Revenue Appeals Tribunal Act, what it does is it provides an opportunity for an independent judge of the tribunal to look into the final decision of the authority, independent of any officer from the authority. So we feel that these two have brought transparency into our actions that we do as Malawi Revenue Authority. Again, in order to buttress the issue of transparency and trust, MRA has committed itself by coming up with a taxpayer charter. This taxpayer charter is a commitment that whatever we do at the authority, we can be checked, because we have made commitments to the extent that if we delay in providing the services because we want something like corruption, the taxpayers will be able to check, and we have provided channels on how they can report such malpractice. Another thing is that in the revised Arusha Declaration, where things go wrong, you are supposed to come up with sanctions. However, there is need for objectivity in the application of the sanctions. If you fail to do that, even if you had support from the members of staff, eventually they will withdraw the trust. So with the help from A-CIP program, we managed to come up with disciplinary code and case handling code, whereby we have standardized the sanctions. When a matter is brought before a disciplinary committee, pretty well, I think we can predict that by the end of the day, the sanctions that will be applied will be similar to the previous cases. Because if we don't do that, what may happen is that within the system, somebody may misuse the sanctions and target a specific group of people. That's what we don't want. We want to preserve the integrity of the system so that every staff knows that whenever a sanction has been meted on him, it is based on evidence and nothing else. Now, there are so many benefits to having institution-specific approach in the fight against corruption. Because, as I have stated, the first thing is you do self-assessment. And when you are doing self-assessment, what happens is that you consult members of staff. And this consultation process makes members of staff to contribute towards the solution towards corruption, against corruption, in the fight against corruption. By the end of the day, whatever you agree, they own it. Rather than simply management sitting down and come up with interventions and impose on the members of staff. So this is one of the benefits of having a specific, institution-specific approach, and where it starts from the consultation up to the time that you sit down and say, here we have the approaches to the vice. Again, within the interventions, even the sanctions that I was talking about, probably it becomes as a contribution from the members of staff. So by the end of the day, there are no surprise whenever a sanction has been meted against any of them, because they know where it started and why we have that sanction. Now, MRA, as I've said, is not only sitting down to say, we'll wait for government to tell us what to do in the fight against corruption. That's not what we are doing. At national level, it is also taking a leading role. For example, under the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, now we are at the second National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Each public institution is supposed to have an institutional integrity committee. And MRA does not want simply to have it on paper. Our institutional integrity committee is very vibrant. As if you can go down, you see that recently we have had awareness campaigns within the city of London to say, we are here, and whenever you feel that anybody is probably asking for bribes from taxpayers, here are the channels where you can report, and this is how we are going to handle your issue. In 2013, the Parliament of Malawi passed a legislation that requires that public officers should be declaring their assets, business interests, and liabilities. That is also a piece of legislation that is helping in the fight against corruption. But I can tell you that even before the enactment of this legislation, MLA had already put in place asset declaration as a requirement by any MLA officer. I can comfortably say that probably the legislation was influenced by the positive results that MLA was getting through this program. Finally, we are now in the process of having a national lifestyle audit legislation. A few months ago, MRA had already started coming up with a policy on lifestyle audit, and with the assistance by our colleagues from Canada and other experts from Mauritius, we came up with a policy. And that policy, when it went to the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Finance decided that it has to be a national policy, not necessarily just for MRA. So these are some of the initiatives that MRA has introduced but eventually they have ended to be part of the national initiative in the fight against corruption. So MLI is there, not sitting only to wait for government to force it to fight corruption, but we also took initiatives that eventually come to be national policies in the fight against corruption. Finally, I may comfortably conclude that anti-corruption and the integrity programs to be effective in the customs, they require thorough analysis of the customs administration and the environment in which it is operating. Due to the unique nature of customs role in economic development, customs is supposed to have a leading role in the fight against corruption. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Tepeka. So it's great to hear how the revised Arusha Declaration, the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, and the list is how these are making contributions in the MRA, so it's fantastic. Next up, I'd like to welcome to the podium Mr. Matthew Klein, who's the Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Professional Responsibility within the United States Customs and Border Protection. Matt?
Thank you, Alan. So good afternoon. Matthew Klein. Again, I'm here with CBP, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and I'm based here in Washington, D.C., so thank you to the organizers for really saving me a good commute today. Also, thanks to everybody that's tuned in. Listening, I think that the subject matter could be a bit dry for some folks. I think only we can get excited about this stuff, but at the same time, it's just so important for not just for us to describe the specific institution measures that we take in order to combat corruption, but it's also so important for all of us in the work we do that Andrea was describing with the WCO to really take this anti-corruption effort globally through the WCO. So it's just hugely important. I think a theme that we're going to hear, hopefully we'll have a chance to talk a little bit, but that's the trust in public institutions, and the customs institutions are one of the more, if not the most visible, sort of outwardly facing government institutions globally, and it's so important to have that confidence in those institutions. So with that, again, so important to talk about the individual and the sort of the specific measures that we take. So just a few minutes talking about anti-corruption measures in U.S. Customs and Border Protection here in the U.S. And how they've been tailored to meet our specific needs. As many of you know, U.S. CBP is somewhat of a unique institution, really put together after the events of 9/11 in 2003 with the Department of Homeland Security. And it's a unified border security agency in that it's not just the international trade and the customs functions, but also the border, managing the border security in between all of those ports of entry. So you think about the United States, the border with Canada, southern border with Mexico, and then the two shorelines. We're talking several thousand miles. So this requires an approach to managing integrity that, again, is very unique to our organization. Our office, the office that I have been leading for about 7 years now, the Office of Professional Responsibility, we're not just responsible for investigating corruption, but also for identifying and preventing corruption and corrupt behavior from occurring in the first place. And one of the ways we do that is from preventing carefully vetting people from coming into the positions, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. But just a few important points. It's not enough, and again, we'll talk about this. I wasn't ready for that one yet, but maybe we can go back. It's not enough just to have either an internal affairs or an office of internal investigations as a standalone, and I heard before the comment of who's in charge of integrity in your organization. Well, those guys are. It's simply not enough to do that. At CBP, this is a whole of agency approach to integrity, and it's just incredibly important for that to happen. Some examples to that, in CBP, we have incoming commissioners. They're appointed. Every year, the commissioner puts out his or her strategic priorities. Again, what the agency is going to focus on, both operationally. Again, what the strategic priorities are. And if you look at the priorities over the last few years, and even including this year, integrity and transparency are listed right up there with again, operational priorities of, again, securing the border and maintaining effective international trade. So to further amplify this, there's a permanent integrity leadership council, and I just heard that from my colleague in Malawi. It's a very successful model. Most senior executives, all senior executives from the entirety of the organization are a part of the council. The council meets at least 4 times a year, and all matters relating to integrity are discussed in this, and ideas are exchanged and in this council. But things like hiring practices, discipline for employees, how to promote integrity by recognizing positive behavior, identifying trends and within the agency. So again, anything that has to do with integrity for the agency, it is taken out of the responsibility of just one office and brought through the entire agency and its leadership. The council also discusses ways to incorporate integrity into performance plans for senior managers, and that's something that's very important, that managers are held accountable to how they manage integrity. And that's something that they have to demonstrate. It's something that's measured in a number of key ways, but holding employees accountable for negative behaviors, for positive behaviors, is something that they're held to account. So that's something that's very important. One of the products that this Integrity Leadership Council has recently put together or produced is the CBP Integrity and Accountability Strategy, meaning, again, this is a very large organization which now has a strategy for managing integrity, and for those interested, we're going to be posting it online in the coming months. One final point, just before going into the specific programs, is that in CBP, and I'm sure in many organizations, the head of the Office of Professional Responsibility reports directly to the commissioner. And this is important to make sure that the office is free of interference or the perception of interference while conducting oversight responsibilities. Finally, employees are required to take integrity awareness training every year. It's the same training, but it talks about issues like misusing the position, accepting gifts, or other rules of behavior. And again, something that's put in place, and employees have to retake it essentially every year. I can do the next slide, or someone else can. Oh, I got it. CBP, this is actually a screenshot of our part of the CBP website. Cases involving corruption after an arrest and a conviction are actually posted on an internal website called Trust But Trade. If you scroll down, and we kept it out because it's not a public, it's an internal, but there are faces and names of employees that have been arrested and convicted of corruption. And the intent is, and we find it to be effective, is to sort of act as a cautionary tale that not just somebody is watching you, but somebody's going to eventually catch you, and that a prosecutor is actually going to take the case and prosecute the case. And so the cases are actually described with what the type of corruption was, and then typically what type of penalty they received. One more slide, there you go. So I'll talk fast because I know time is short. We I spoke earlier about, first of all, how do we prevent bad behavior, and that the first part is paying a lot of attention to, and this is something that we do in OPR, is screening applicants, and so we do that through various programs. But then once you pass that phase and you're hired, we're not finished with you. There's several other programs that continue to watch you as you sort of progress through your career. So very quickly, pre-screening, entrance exam, all the typical things that sort of weed out very obvious issues that would cause someone to be unsuitable for this type of a public trust position. And when I say public trust, I'm talking about both on the customs side, but there are also border patrol agents. There are also hundreds of pilots and boat operators, and these are all folks that both patrol the border and engage in the customs side of things. Pre-screening is something that happens, or pre-security is something that happens managed through OPR, and it is, again, a series of questions just to make sure, talking about drugs and other suitability issues, crimes that have not been reported. Polygraph, every law enforcement or most of the folks in CBP are considered law enforcement or folks that are operating in sensitive positions. So every one of those individuals, there are about 44,000 of them, prior to being hired, has to pass a polygraph. So the negative side is that it makes hiring a bit more difficult. You lose a good amount of folks to the polygraph, but passing it is something that's required. And then, similar to what Alan was describing, a background investigation is a comprehensive background investigation that involves looking at past employment, questioning neighbors, looking at finances, all things that looking for potential triggers that could indicate that someone is, again, unsuitable for this type of work. So moving down to the employee side of it, again, we said we're not finished. All of the areas except for random drug screening, which is managed by our human resources, are managed by OPR. And again, it's a way to consolidate and for us to be aware of, essentially to own all of those programs. And random drug testing, I think, is, I'm not sure if it's been mentioned before, but obviously illegal drugs, drugs in general could be contributing to a lot of negative behavior. We want to make sure that folks are not using illegal drugs. So a large percentage of the agency is randomly tested every year. You don't know when that's going to happen. If you test positive, then you're out. So moving over to integrity assurance, root causes of corruption are identified and addressed through a protocol referred to as post-corruption analysis. What does that mean? Again, in OPR, if someone is arrested for corruption, then it's an opportunity for us to take a look at that and really dissect it and understand what enabled that corruption. Aside from the fact of we're interested in the behavioral aspects of it, most people are motivated by the monetary advantages that come from corruption, but we're interested in what enabled that employee to conduct that corrupt behavior. So we with our background investigators, we pull the background investigation, we pull the polygraph report, we pull every interviews with fellow employees. We try to interview the corrupt employee if we can, and really conduct an analysis of what enabled that employee to essentially get away with the corruption, so that we can then go back and really sort of close those doors as we move through that hallway, if you will. Our threat mitigation analysis division, also within OPR, is another division a couple of dozen analysts that it's OPR's internal analytical arm. They research and analyze data and information surrounding individuals and misconduct, again, using a variety of tools to essentially try to map out, predict where corruption is happening. But it's really, in an agency like this that is so spread out with 60-something thousand employees, obviously you can't keep an eye on every one of them, but it's reviewing the data, looking at the data of transactions that they conduct. It's also looking at finances and looking at other issues that they're supposed to be reporting but may not in order to draw conclusions. There are also sets of triggers, again, certain financial triggers or certain activities crossing the border with certain associates. And those triggers, again, they trigger a review. Someone, Alan mentioned, querying their own name or querying somebody that they may know, that they may have reported previously in a system, which is typically an indicator that they're looking for something, they're worried about something, and that's something that we then again we take a careful look at. Integrity testing, as the name suggests, groups of folks go out and conduct both covert and overt tests and inspections of various facilities, just to make sure that folks are following policies. Corruption review and investigations is something we only started a couple of years ago. Again, this is a very large agency with the history of the agency goes back even though 2003, but there were a lot of individuals that were there dating back to the Customs Service even beforehand. And so our CRIU is really, we modeled it after a cold case squad, and if you've heard that term before. And these are old cases where there may have been allegations of corruption. There may have been somebody thought that somebody was doing something, but even multiple allegations. So we look at folks with multiple allegations where nothing has come out of it. And this unit, they sit and they examine new opportunities to look at these cases again. With new data that so in other words, we're not moving on from employees. Alan mentioned periodic reinvestigations. Ours are every 5 to 7 years, so it's the same thing as the initial background investigation that an employee has, but every 5 to 7 years you're supposed to go to a new one. However, the U.S. government as a whole is moving away from that. It is incredibly both inefficient, expensive, difficult to do, and waiting 5 to 7 years in order to re-examine what someone is doing is also inefficient. So moving something toward something called continuous evaluation, which is something that we're already doing in CBP, and that is essentially continuous vetting, which means that we run on a continuous basis all of our employees through numerous databases in order to see if there's any unreported issues or contacts with law enforcement or crimes that the employees have not reported, and we get that in real time. So if someone has been arrested for something, there's a requirement to self-report that, but now the agency, we become aware of it in real time. Last two areas, the 24/7 Joint Intake Center, and this is very important because this is CBP's clearing, sort of central clearinghouse. It's a reporting center for all allegations of misconduct. So someone can report, either a colleague, a supervisor can report an employee, someone can report someone anonymously. So it's an opportunity for anyone to, again, report any sort of suspicious activity or something that goes even beyond that. But it's important because it doesn't just hold the agency and accountable in that it allows for that type of reporting, but it also holds us, the investigators, accountable in that every allegation is tracked. It's giving it a unique number. So there's no more calling an office with one person there late at night and saying, yep, I got it, thank you very much, and it goes in a drawer. It is tracked, it's in a system, and it has to be investigated and has to be reported in one way or another, either by OPR or we get assistance from others within the agency. And last, I'll close with our investigations. We have again, probably the most important arm of following up on these allegations of corruption. We in CBP maintain offices throughout the U.S. Our largest offices are concentrated where there are the largest numbers of CBP employees. There are some areas in the country where some of them are very sort of sparsely populated. We were talking earlier about some parts of the Canadian border where there are land ports with perhaps with 2 or 3 employees at any given time. But then you move over to places like San Diego, a land port of entry with 48 lanes of traffic and hundreds of thousands of people crossing every day. So our largest offices are where we have the largest numbers of employees, and that enables us to again respond to both critical incidents that happen and respond in real time, but also be on the ground to conduct those investigations. So I will stop there. Sorry for going long, and look forward to some more discussions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Klein. I love how you introduced with your speaking points about trust being essential and required. I'm sure for many of us here, we've heard throughout the conference so far how often the words trust and transparency have been coming out. Next, last but not least, I'd like to introduce to the podium Ms. Selina Clarke-Graham, who's Deputy and CEO of Operations within Jamaica Customs.
Thank you very much, Alan. Good afternoon, warm Jamaican afternoon to all present in this room. I'm delighted to bring greetings on behalf of the Commissioner of Customs and the entire staff population. I'm delighted that I was invited to participate in this conference, and I've been enjoying it thus far. Well, a lot has been said, some areas covered, but I will run through nonetheless. Hopefully I have your attention since I'm the last speaker. Those are around the corner. I can hardly see you. So let's move on. Jamaica Customs Agency. Oh, I was looking for my clicker. Sorry. Does it work? Ah, awesome. At the end of this presentation, I am hoping that you will understand the context of the Jamaica Customs Agency, the JCA, WCO, A-CIP program activities that have been undertaken, the focus of the JCA, A-CIP program, the outcomes and the benefits, as well as we'll be highlighting the JCA internal controls applicable to the utilization of external technological-based apparatus, non-intrusive inspection, security vetting, strategic and business reform initiatives being pursued by the JCA. The context of the Jamaica Customs Agency, and I deliberately placed that slide there. We have a total of 1,366 employees. 64% of the total cohort are actually women. Huh? And 75% forms the support and line staff. That's a significant number. And I've placed it there because corruption is important, and we have to put systems in place to safeguard that large block of employees or the front-facing persons within the agency. Not that it is important for executives and other management team, but the line staff are the ones who bear the brunt of the interface with the public. In terms of our geographical dispersed across our territory, we occupy 9 out of the 14 parishes. That's where you find customs. And most of our locations, that's the Kingston metropolitan area, and those who know Norman Manley International Airport, so it's right along the coastline right there, and that's where most of our operations take place and where our head offices are. In terms of customs, like other customs authorities, or 3 core mandates: trade facilitation, border protection, and revenue protection. Our vision is consistent to a lot of what has been talked about this afternoon: modern customs administration, excellent service, fostering compliance, and by extension, we will contribute to the national development and the protection of our society. Our mission encapsulates our mandate, and we do that through collaborative border management and delivery of high-quality customer service, and develop and maintain a team of motivated, professional, and competent staff. So the JCA has partnered with the WCO in this anti-corruption fight, and they came to us and in April of 2021, and we embarked on a mission to aid us in this integrity fight. The activities that have been undertaken thus far include a remote self-assessment under the 10 key factors, and I need not go back there because that has been clearly established and discussed by my colleague Francis. So we take that on board, and what we had a team of internal persons who assessed where customs agency is in terms of those 10 key factors to see where we are doing well and where we are found wanting. So a very detailed assessment was done. In terms of the CIPS program, we did that in a hybrid approach in November of 2021 and also in January of 2022. And the results of the survey are here. And that was a very extensive survey which dealt with the internal and the external stakeholders alike. We also did social media and integrity workshop. That was in May of this year. That was quite extensive. We are living in the social media era. And if we can capture that in terms of letting people know what customs is about and how important integrity is to customs, then we'll be doing a good thing. Just the other day, we were on Twitter having a discussion with the public about what customs does, and basically to change the perception of customs and to make them understand that customs is not the enemy, but customs is here to do its job and to promote integrity and combat corruption. In terms of the WCO A-CIP mission, we had our mission in October of this year. The results of the CIP was presented to us, and we are analyzing. Say we got a draft as well, and we're looking at it. And I noted that Andrea spoke about some of the things that would have come out of the CIP. So sometimes customs feels that they're doing a lot, and we're doing well. But when you look at the responses from the external, it tells a different story. And so you have to go back to the drawing board, assess yourself, and determine whether or not you're meeting the needs of the people. And so that is important. We were also introduced to the whole matter of corruption mapping at that time when the mission came, and we have taken that on board, and we believe that that can aid us tremendously in this fight against corruption. In terms of the outcomes, as you can see there, we will have to develop an action plan in terms of how we will treat the results of the CIPs. We will have to enhance our capacity to monitor and implement the integrity-related activities and utilization of the corruption risk mapping, as I mentioned earlier. And I will skip that slide. So what are some of the additional controls that the JCA has put in place, right? So those are our officers right there in their body cameras. So our officers are actually equipped with body cameras because it tells a different story. When persons can tamper with the CCTV footages that are in warehouses, the body camera will give us a different story, right? And so our officers wear that in the examination process. So when an importer complains that something has gone wrong, we can go back and look at the footage and determine whether or not they're telling the truth or not. We have invested in drones, so there are some areas, and I showed you the map of Jamaica that we are in the nook and crannies. There are some areas that we cannot possibly police, supervise. Though we have boats, the boats maybe cannot navigate those narrow passages. And so the drone technology assists us in getting to those areas so we can identify vessels that may have come in to our territorial waters undetected and might not have reported to customs, among other nefarious activities. The iDetect system has been piloted in the Jamaica Customs Agency, and so persons are going through this process whereby we examine the readings that come from these detect scenarios and determine whether or not these are persons that we wish to continue our engagement with, or we should allow them to be separated from the agency. So that is ongoing. In terms of our non-intrusive inspection in this fight against corruption, we are looking to establish a remote imaging center, and that will allow us to centralize cargo imaging at our airport. So all the cargo that comes in at the airport will be scanned at one location, and then also for the passenger, and then they move across to the location. That will allow us to determine what and who we have an interest in. So those persons who are compliant based on the reading can go through. And those who are non-compliant, then we spend a little more attention on them, and we interrogate their baggage or the cargo that has been presented to us. In terms of the ASICUDA enhancement modules, I mean, that is a very important thing. Border protection cannot operate without proper enforcement module in ASICUDA. Customs has come from a very paper-based approach. Prior to 2016, our processes were manual. We had systems, but not systems that were integrated. They were disjointed. But ASICUDA has brought that integration and has given us an ability to look at things holistically. And so the enforcement module that will be given to the border protection team to better equip them in this fight. In terms of the integration of the images with ASICUDA, that is important because the officers on the front line, they are not the ones who are doing the actual imaging at some point. So if the officer is doing an examination, it is good for them to see exactly what the images are saying, so it allows them to do a more targeted approach in terms of their examination. And that is assisting greatly. May I run on to save time? All right, so those are some of the things under the non-intrusive inspection. In terms of security vetting, and a lot of discussion has come out of this in terms of security vetting, strict security vetting policy for all members of staff, none excused. Everybody has to go through this process, regardless of whatever level you're entering the organization at, you have to go through this security vetting. In terms of our own stakeholders, the port operators, warehouse operators, we have developed a set of security vetting guidelines that vets them, because you can imagine that these operators, they hold a lot of information that we don't have. So we have come up with guidelines that we're saying to them, share the information with us. We want to know who you are. Your staff have identification to be entering the port, things like that, right? So that is very important for us, and it is also assisting in the anti-corruption fight. What can we do without embarking on system reform to aid and abet corruption? So we're talking about the installation of the new ASICUDA World 4.33, which will be coming on stream in January of 2023. And that will basically aid the efficiency in the agency more than we're seeing now, and allow us to have a more 360-degree view of what is happening in our space. In terms of the IACC cargo XML module, which will allow our cargo carriers to send us advanced manifests so we can analyze and critique and determine what we will feed into the risk management process. In terms of the integration of the cargo selectivity functions, that again will assist the risk management and basically seek to stamp out the corruption. The express courier, the e-commerce industry in Jamaica, it is growing leaps and bounds. Everybody is becoming an e-commerce operator. So we thought it necessary to put in a module that can assist us in better monitoring this particular sector in terms of assessing where they are, knowing who they are. Background checks are done on these people. So as Matt said, we visit their homes. We want to know where they live, who they are associated with. And we give them access to our system. So we have to develop a profile of them and develop a module that can better regulate and assist this process. Simplified declarations for passengers who are coming in. Oftentimes, passengers will seek to bribe our officers at the front line when they're coming in with dutable items. We're saying to you, this simplified approach will allow you to prepare your declaration for your dutable items in advance of your arrival. You prepare, you pay. We will assess and determine whether or not we want to see you when you come. It may very well be that when you arrive, you go right through, and we have more interest in you. So that's a simplified approach. In terms of the integration of ASICUDA with the UPU, Universal Postal Union, no, we do not get the manifest at the post office from UPU. So we're seeking to integrate that with the cargo declaration system so that we can get that manifest in advance. And we have a lot of seizures coming through the post office, so that is very important for us to do, and we're working on that as well. I'll move on in the essence of time. Vessel clearance, electronic departure, card application, so persons will be able to apply into our system to get their clearance. Okay, let's move on quickly. In terms of the electronic single window J-SWIFT, that is key. In terms of our modernization efforts and the pillars that govern the revised Arusha Declaration and how we treat with our border regulatory agencies, this system, as seen where licenses, permits, and certificates for the border regulatory agencies are applied for through the Customs Jamaica single window for trade system. Previously, all of these licenses, permits, and certificates were manual. Manual writes off. Persons had to leave their offices, come to customs. The application process, that fueled corruption because it was so long that persons would pay their way to get through. But with this system, it is more efficient, it is real time, and you pay and the system moves quickly. So it has greatly aided the efficiency. In terms of our warehouse inventory, the legacy system that I spoke about earlier, we are able to basically have a data repository to take care of that so we can go back to it on a needs basis. Research registry in terms of implementation of electronic quality monitoring system. I must point out that the Jamaica Customs Agency is currently going through the ISO Stage 2 audit for us to be ISO certified. This system is important for us because we want to be able to assess our system from a QMS perspective. How well are we doing? How poor are we doing? How is our service? How have we been meeting the needs of our customers? So we are going through that rigorous process and stress testing our system to see where we are. So that tool is very important for us. In terms of forensic audit software, that will aid our intelligence unit in garnering information on importers, traders that are of interest to us. And so it will be able to link their associations and better able to filter the information to the public, right? I'll move on. Enterprise risk management system is another thing which we are involved in to look at risk from a holistic approach within the agency. We are implementing a K9 unit. So currently, we get services from the JCF. Customs is building its own building, and will be staffing the unit with officers who are trained in the operation of these very valuable assets or dogs, and will be able to more readily assist with the export and import of cargo, among other things. In terms of our CCTV surveillance monitoring, among other things, ethics program. To conclude, our legislative reform is very important, and we are going through Parliament as we speak now with our new Customs Act. And embedded in the new Customs Act is a provision which speaks to the reward for persons who bring information to customs pertaining to customs laws breaches that will allow us to detect, investigate, and prosecute persons who bribe our officers or otherwise engage in corruption, so they'll be rewarded. We will also be drafting guidelines for what you call it protective disclosure. We protect persons who bring information, be it internal staff or those on the external who provide us with the information. I thank you very much for listening to me.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Selina. Thank you for everyone. We did go a little bit over time. We did have scheduled Q&A, so we'll take 25 more. No, I'm just kidding. We're gonna stop it now. But I know myself and maybe some others will hang outside the room. For anyone that does have questions, we can definitely feel that. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and conference. Thank you.